Hello, I'm Mantastic and Fantastic, and today I'm going to be talking about my new legendary, rare, and now common tier list for Creature Quest. So, with the arrival of version 1.7, we're going to be seeing a nice and I'd say healthy change to the PvP meta. And this is because we are going to be highly incentivized to fill out multiple dungeons, because filling out multiple dungeons will result in a higher likelihood that our specials will be casting upon entering each floor. Now, if you only fill out one dungeon, the chances of your specials being available, at least to start, will be incredibly low. Now, obviously, having 4 dots can help semi-counteract this problem, because if they weren't casting, they probably will start casting right away. But of course, we want to maximize our efficiency overall. However, with the fact that we're gaining stat bonuses for one color every week, can help influence the decisions we make for our bosses as well as other floors, as well as possibly even having bosses that are stun and silence immune. So with that in mind, things will have shifted and or changed, as well as me introducing a common or small tier list, because we're going to be seeing a lot more small creatures. I plan to work on an epic tier list soon, but it's not as, I guess, exciting necessarily, because there's only really just one epic creature that's a standout, and it's really just Dark Elf. Only the Dark Elf is a big standout from the crowd. Everyone else, like, there's some that are good, but nothing is great. Dark Elf is great. All the others, like, some others are good and the rest are just mediocre to bad. So what is the current meta in PvP? So it's going to be still a little hard to predict, because we're still in the opening phases of this new shift for filling out multiple dungeons. And because of that, it may be harder to always stack your more desirable cards in your dungeon at once, because we had to fill out 5. You either spread out your egg. You can't put all your eggs in one basket, maybe spread them out. But if you put them all in one basket, maybe just pray that individuals attacking your dungeon only find your strong dungeon. Like, it could happen. Like, I've had 3 dungeons active. One of them has been attacked once out of like 25 plus times. So it's not even my scariest one. So it's not people avoiding it. So I'm not quite sure on the formula as to how dungeons are being visible. But in an ideal world, when you reach gold level, you want to be able to fill out all 5 to take advantage of all the buffs possible. Now, the silence and stun immune parts are nice for sure, but it's really just having the specials starting in turn 1, because that's usually going to be the biggest determinant of how well your dungeon performs. Because if you kill off enough things on floor 1, your floors 2 and boss can just mop up the rest, so to speak. So with all that being said, I am very, very well aware that a lot of players are saying that, well, XYZ boss is not very powerful or scary because I can kill it no problem. But the thing is, everything in the game has a direct counter. And if you're running their counter, it's going to be very easy to overcome them. For instance, Sphinx is a very terrifying boss, but a green card tends to be able to solo it. And that's kind of the true case for all the red, blue, green, yellow creatures out there. They all basically counter by each other. So again, Phoenix gets destroyed by anything blue, but anything that's not blue has a very tough time soloing Phoenix. Like, you get that sort of idea. So with that in mind, just take everything with a grain of salt, because sometimes you are going to change your dungeons to counter the people who are fighting you that seem to be slipping through. So what are enchants? So enchants are basically a reasonably new feature that allows us to kind of customize and enhance our creatures. However, there are some enchants that are just far better than others, and you usually just want to min-max yourself to optimize your defense, and that usually results in their stat modifiers, so like bonus attack, defense, luck, and power. Most notably, luck and power tend to be the best, or crit strike chance, or bonus damage to large and boss, as well as health being basically the only good wood enchant. So for the purposes of these tier lists, it assumes everything is maximum enchanted, gold, perfect enchants, which is not necessarily a realistic scenario. Kingdom Shrines, similar idea. It provides buffs, but again, for these tier lists, I'm just going to assume everyone's got perfect level 30 shrines with a fully awakened legendary working there, and I guess boosting as well. Like, the idea is everything has to be on a level playing field. Furthermore, all creatures are assumed to be fully awoken and max number of combo dots. But if you do have something that's 4 dots but is a lower tier, you almost can think it moves up a little bit, because for the most part, a 3-dot creature as S tier is usually similar-ish power to an A rank creature that's 4 dots. You can kind of use like a dot as a way to move them up a rung, so to speak, or move them down. So what are the criteria for offense in PvP? So they still have not really changed too much. We want to utilize a mana funnel. And a mana funnel is basically having a team where you have color dots funneling all their mana into one particular card. So in this example here, all of these red dots are going to my Phoenix, and my Phoenix will be able to charge and cast a special every single turn, provided no one's been stunned or killed off. That is an important thing because you're able to use your special abilities to hopefully counteract the dungeon defenders, because when you enter a dungeon, that's when you're most helpless. You have no mana and everyone's about to pound you down to the ground. So you want to have a mana funnel. The target or the recipient of your mana funnel will vary based on your box, as well as what kind of synergy you want to play with. But for the most part, you do want to have ideally 2 creatures that share the same color. So in the second example here, my Oathkeeper and Astral Watcher, they both have the white color, of course, but then all the dots are funneling into white. So that means I can charge up Oathkeeper or almost charge up Astral Watcher every single turn. And that's important because you have special diversity. Instead of just mashing through the exact same special over and over again, you at least have choices or options of which one you want to use because you have 2 cards of the same color. So like I said, for this first example, it would have been better if I had 2 red cards just to be able to have special diversity. And again, there's going to be there's a video here you can watch on your own if you want to find out a little bit more on how to build a strong team as well as mana funnel. Now, another strong thing to keep in mind is strong area of effect or AoE special abilities. And strong AoE special abilities are those that deal full damage to ideally multiple targets. If they are random target in nature, it's no good, it's not reliable, it's not going to hit what you want to kill off. And for example, if you do a AoE attack that does splash damage, if the side targets are not receiving full damage, you're not really accomplishing much. You basically picked off 1 creature, but to do so, you probably have to hit 4 8 times multiplier. And if you're hitting 4 8 times multiplier, you want to be able to remove at least an entire row. So if it's not accomplishing that, this is not a strong AoE. So in the video example here, like, the Minotaur Squire is a strong AoE when fully awoken because it cleaves and does the whole row. But if he's unawoken, for example, he will only do full damage to the main target and half to the secondaries. So for example, Valkyrie, her AoE is very poor by that nature. She only hits 1 target for full, secondaries for half. But she does have other perks and benefits. But the idea is you want AoE funnels that do max damage to ideally as many targets as possible. And at this point in time, there's nothing that has pure damage that's high enough to pick off something. Like, no special ability does enough damage to remove a defender that it's not already strong against. Like, Fire Giant has amazingly powerful special ability, but he is not going to be eliminating anything that's not green in one go. Like, you have to combo him up, and then if you're comboing up, you can't use him on the next turn, and then that's when problems start arising. So pure damage doesn't really work at this point in time. Your creatures need to survive. You need to be durable and be able to actually withstand punishment. If things die too quickly, well, it doesn't matter how great your dot synergy was or how awoken they are. If they just die quick, it's not going to be useful. So obviously, fragile cards have been demoted accordingly. It's hard being green or yellow. It's not as bad as it used to be just because dungeons are somewhat diluted, but we did have our 3rd green nymph or wood nymph being released now. So it makes it quite challenging for yellow creatures to survive because they tend to get picked off. Just because green, they get stunned into oblivion, they take bonus damage. It's just not a good time to be them. Red dungeon defenders are still popular and they do hard counter green, but they're not as prevalent just because we have more choices to choose from. So with that being said, mono black and white tends to be very strong and powerful because yes, they are weak to their opposite color, but they're also strong at the same time. So a team of all, say, white and black is able to at least obviously take more damage, but they can dish out just as much in return. It's not like a green giant who has a terrible time against the red barbarian. At least there is a bit more of an even playing field, so to speak. So here are the changes. Nothing has changed on the offensive tier list. All we have is the Dracolich debuting at A. Nothing really moves up, I feel, just because I'm quite happy with where the cards are at this point in time. If the meta starts shifting quite dramatically, things might be moved or promoted, or if new cards get buffed, so on and so forth. But at this point in time, I just want to have the debut of Dracolich compared to the previous month. And Dracolich is a new legendary, but what their main appeal is that they're very durable and bulky. They have great defensive and health stats, but they have 100% resistance against debuffs. So that means they cannot be stunned, silenced, or debuffed in any way, shape, or form. And that's very important because even though their special ability costs too much mana, they're able to at least donate their mana to someone else unconditionally all the time. And that's quite important because oftentimes your team gets stunned, and only one card can take an action, let's say. But if Dracolich is on your team, he can be like kind of almost being targeted by those stuns with the Defender Tome, and then he will not be stunned and still contribute mana elsewhere. So in an ideal world, Dracolich is not your mana funnel, but he is instead your mana donator. Basically, you want him to sit on your team, ideally with at least 3+ dots of the same color, and just feeding mana into your primary mana funnel recipient, and you have a very good time. Because he's so durable, he's not really going to die. He's just going to be continuously pumping up mana. And that may seem like a little lackluster overall, but it's actually very powerful because we are getting stunned so often. And like I already mentioned, no changes at this point in time. So, new criteria for defense. So, even though we need to heavily populate our dungeons, it's still going to be quite hard to fill out 5 feasibly. Maybe some players are filling out 5 to great success. Maybe they have very deep creature boxes, but that may not be the case. So until I start seeing more and more people utilize the full 5 dungeons, I'm not going to like promote up certain bosses that may do well if they're stun or silence immune. But again, things can shift or change. I feel like the next month when we see what the Lightning Nymph does, as well as the new legendaries, things will hopefully have shaken up or changed, so to speak. Now, again, remember, using a 4-dot boss is usually much better than 3-dot for the most part because they will attack so much more frequently. So again, a lower tiered boss 4-dot can be moved up quite successfully, as well as if you need to counter a specific color. So let's say Bob is continuously beating your dungeon, but he only survives with, say, a red creature like Phoenix. Well, you just stick in almost any blue legendary, provided it's not one of the worst ones possible, and you're going to have a great time because that Phoenix can't really deal with a blue spawn. And that's kind of the way for any other color. You notice someone's coming through with a green giant all the time and nothing else, stick in a red boss. The green giant's going to get burnt to a crisp. So stun was/is king to a certain extent. You can't re-stun targets, but stunning is usually better on floor 1 when multiple targets can hit you. Bosses, for some reason, don't even do that spectacular amounts of damage, even with a level modifier. So only having one thing attacking you is not that terrifying compared to, like, say, 6 different mediums pounding on you hard. Now, you can't chain stun things, so things like Sandworm are not as powerful as they used to be, say, several months ago, but it's still a reasonably viable option to have because you still can disrupt their combo multiplier, especially if you start stun or silence immune. You can really break them up and start hammering them away with lots of damage. So, like I already mentioned, color counters are so meaningful. A blue boss will always beat a red defender pretty much every single time, but conversely, a yellow attacker will stomp that blue boss. So again, color counters are so powerful, but that also means black and white defenders are very strong because they do have a weakness, but they also kind of one-shot their weakness at the same time. So for instance, like Cerberus, who's doing incredibly well right now, is a very terrifying boss because, well, he has a weakness to white, but he also one-shots them in the same regard. So with that in mind, white and black bosses tend to be a little stronger. Powerful AoE abilities are stronger now than they were before Kingdoms and before Enchants. And this is because AoE abilities have their multipliers scaled kind of pre-Kingdoms, pre-Enchants, because they do, like, say, 100, 150, 200% of their, say, power stat. But when you can enchant plus 800 power, when you can shrine, like over 1,000 power at the same time, you are going to be able to deal almost borderline silly amounts of damage because single target bosses can still one-shot things like they always could, but AoE bosses, their damage has been increased so much, relatively speaking, that they could potentially two-shot a team, especially if they start stun and silence immune. They get up to dish out a massive special amount of damage, and then the second hit hopefully finishes off the rest of the team. So AoE that is strong and intelligent and powerful is very meaningful at this point in time. And now, attack or defense scaling legendaries are a little bit more favorable, and that is because during the rotating color bonuses, attack and defense are the ones that are buffed. So if your boss is scaling off of attack, they're going to be dealing silly amounts of damage because they have their primary stat augmented even further. So this is definitely going to reflect certain cards like the Fallen Angel or the one that comes from VIP 8 because he scales off attack, and this week, because he is black and it's black attack, he is dealing borderline silly amounts of damage. Like, he's almost one-shotting an entire team by himself on the first move. 2 turns, he will one-shot everything. That's pretty amazing for the most part. So in this tier list, the Ancient Blue Dragon and the Fallen Angel have both moved up to S tier, and I'll explain why shortly. Monkey King goes from B to A, Dracolich debuts at A, and then Sanam goes from C to B. Other than that, no other changes or shifts have been made at this point in time. So, what are the big changes? So Ancient Blue Dragon has gone through kind of a roller coaster. He was great, then got kind of nerfed by the stun meta, and now he's coming back up just because we're having such strong scaling for power with enchants and shrines that Ancient Blue Dragons can be dealing so much damage. And we're getting to the point where you might even have him stun or silence immune. So he's going to be able to cast his first special, but unlike other AoE special abilities, he's dealing large damage to all the targets, but it's not a chaining ability that has targeting issues. Chaining abilities like Monkey King don't jump to the next target, so that makes them a little more lackluster. If something dies in the middle, a lot of your damage is kind of cut off, so to speak. Whereas Ancient Blue Dragon can still dish out massive amounts of damage without really much fear at all, so to speak. So this is why he's now S tier once again, because again, power is being scaled so fast that he can dish out amazing amounts of damage, and furthermore, he does bonus damage if you're stunned. So he gets that first special off, hopefully kills off something, stuns everyone, casts another special, even more damage is dished out, and most things may have died by that point. So obviously yellow things can counter him, but again, that's kind of like any non-black and white boss. Again, Fallen Angel, like I already explained, he scales off attack, so he's going to be dealing amazing amounts of damage. But he does 320% attack to the primary target, and then 200% attack if the primary target was killed, which they pretty much are always killed, because that's a high single target nuke. So because of that, he is arguably the highest damage special ability for an AoE, especially when it's getting the bonus for a black attack. So that's why he's so powerful and deadly. Furthermore, when he kills someone, he heals himself a silly amount of health, so he's very hard to actually deal with because he starts killing your team off and just keeps healing back up, and he does massive amounts of damage with his special ability. Monkey King goes from B to A, and Monkey King has continued to basically kind of exceed my expectations for how powerful he potentially can be. And this is because his damage is so kind of swingy and random in nature. He has 40% crit rate naturally, so he's able to one-shot a lot of targets, which is unusual for an AoE-oriented special. And he can chain back and forth. So if, say, the attacking team has been reduced down to 3 and they're all beside each other, Monkey King might just one-shot all 3 of those, even at full health, because the damage will chain and splash and just obliterate everyone overall. So this can lead to very interesting scenarios where Monkey King can deliver surprise victories, so to speak. But again, his biggest weakness is obviously being blue and the chaining having unintelligent pathing. So a smart player will actually stick their red creature right in the middle. So when it gets one shot by Monkey King, the subsequent Nimbus strikes are not going to ricochet around and deal as much damage overall. So he does have counters, but he's still quite unexpected as a defender overall. Now, Dracolich debuts at A. So I initially felt Dracolich was just a healer, but in actuality, he actually can be quite terrifying as a boss because his damage scales off health, which I think is the only one in the entire game. So that is unique because he does have large amounts of health, but because of full debuff immunity, he's going to be very hard to actually take down because he's always stun and silence immune as well as other debuffs. So basically it becomes a kind of grind slogfest. But because when his special hits multiple targets, he heals so much, he's going to be dealing like modest amounts of damage every turn, but he's going to be healing himself back up. So you're basically having to try and punch your way through him without being able to stun. So it's going to be a long grind, and I can foresee it being quite powerful, especially during Black Weeks when he gets even more health, and it becomes very hard to actually kill and deal with. Because dots like, say, Cerberus and Phoenix's poisons and burns won't actually hit him, which is quite powerful for the most part. And now Sanam goes from C to B, kind of similar idea of how the power scaling is more effective overall, but Sanam did receive a sizable health buff in this very recent patch, so he's a lot tankier than he used to be. Still not the greatest, but definitely not as bad as he was, say, a couple months ago. So again, there's another video of how to build a stronger defense. Might be useful to watch. Rare and common tier lists. So the following tiers for rare and common creatures are basically taking into consideration how they perform without any form of synergy whatsoever. And elaborate synergy is basically anything that is not like a power buff. Like elaborate synergy can include multiple poison characters to stack the dots and deal bonus damage because they have those awakenings. You have a luck debuffer for your mummy to trigger bonus damage, or you're buffing like a particular stat. for someone who scales off something that's not power, because power is the most universally accessible special ability. Most specials scale off power, so power buffs tend to be strong. And also, Wyvern is such a dominant red flyer that you want to run power creatures because you get the Wyvern buff, and then power, everyone's empowered, and you just get crazy amounts of damage pumping out for the most part. However, with that being said, when you factor in enchants, a luck scaling creature is technically the best for a dungeon defender from an enchanting point of view, because you can get bonus crit chance, luck, and then bonus damage to boss creatures. So you're getting all the three major things: your primary stat, the bonus crit, and the bonus damage to large and boss. So that can have merits as well, and is definitely going to be reflected in one of the medium creatures being promoted. So here are the ranking criteria. What we want to consider is, does the color counter popular meta legendaries? So for example, Skeleton is one of the most popular dungeon defenders because white with Astral Watcher is such a dominant force being seen in the PvP meta. Does the special ability deal large amounts of damage? Like IE, does it have like bonus crit chance or a high multiplier? That sort of idea. Does the special provide reliable stun or silence? Incapacitating the attacking team makes your life a lot easier. Can the special provide multiple relevant buffs or debuffs? So the best buffs are power and mend for the most part, universally speaking, and the best debuffs are power, defense, and fatigue for the most part. Again, you might have elaborate synergies, but this is taking kind of each creature almost as an individual one. Having a healer is definitely helpful, but they need to have some form of additional benefit to be of merit. So the rare creature tier list, very little movement was occurring for the flyers. I only promoted the possessed marionette from B to A because he does have a decent damaging ability. He does have a decent debuff, including fatigue, as well as, I think, power and luck, if I'm not mistaken. So he's debuffing very valuable things for the most part. So he's kind of like a budget statue, but he's more reliable. Statue doesn't deal damage, whereas the marionette does decent damage. You can't necessarily ignore him that well, but because his debuffs are more reliable, it can be quite meaningful for the most part. So I would not be surprised if we start seeing a bit more of those marionettes flying around in Dungeon Defense. In terms of ground creatures, we have the Kitsune and the Lizard Man, and then moving from A to S, and then Drill Man going from S to A. So why did I make these promotions and demotions? So Kitsune scales off luck, and in fact she has the highest scaling multiplier in the game for rare creatures. It's 360% luck. Most specials are 200 to 250% of their primary attribute, but Kitsune also has almost 1,000 more primary stat than other creatures at the same time, with gold enchants, and I have my Kitsune of a gold luck enchant as well as level 26 shrine. So she's already passing 4,000 luck. Most other creatures hit around 3,000 of their primary stat, maybe a little higher, 3.3. So she's already way ahead of everyone else and has a higher multiplier. So she's quite crazy for the most part. Like, she one-shots basically any black creature in the game, and she does sizable amounts of damage to non-black creatures at the same time while debuffing. If she gets a luck buff, she one-shots basically anyone. It's quite scary to face one, or two or three, if you can find that. Lizard Man is also bumped up because Lizard Man does have 40% crit rate against large and bosses, so that's a big damage boost for the most part. And yes, it's kind of random target in nature, but it also can perform kind of miraculous attacks, because if those random targets just happen to land several times in the same one, you could potentially one-shot something that's not even what you're effective against color-wise, just because you get the crits and the multiple hits. And he gets more scary as your attackers get picked off one by one. When there's 3 remaining, he's even more scary because those arrows are starting to be more focused in their damage. 2 or 1 is basically like you're going to die for the most part. Now, Drill was demoted from S to A because Drill is just having too much competition for kind of this utility spot, because with small creatures being used more favorably, especially the Toad, it's a little harder to really justify using the Drill Man overall when you want to have something that does damage or provides a stun. Defense break is useful, but it's not as powerful as a stun. So that's the main reason why it was demoted. But during white weeks where defense is buffed, it can be meaningful. And now we come to my common creature tier list. So in the S tier, we've got the Friar Mantis, the Pristine Ornith I can't pronounce things, that white kite. And then we have the Monarch Butterfly in S tier. And then we have the Raven, the Clockwork Technician, and the Squirrel Ace in A. And then we've got a bunch of other things moving down as we go along. For small creatures on the ground, only Toad is S tier. In actuality, it's really just Toad. Like, Toad is great. Toad is amazing. Toad exists, basically. Like, Toad dominates because of the AoE stun. So usually you want to use a Toad for the most part. And I have 2 4-dot Toads, and I use them all the time just because they're so powerful. In A tier, we've got the Drunken Leprechaun, we've got the Spike, we've got the Gnome Sniper, which is like the Toad, but not as reliable for stunning. We've got the Fiendish Imp, we got the Tormenting Devilkin, we got the Ant Captain. So for smalls, because they have worse stats than medium creatures, you tend to want to use more supportive ones. Like, the only real exception is Friar Mantis, who actually does a stupid amount of damage, but everyone else should be more supportive in nature, and it's kind of reflected here. We got a Resurrector, we got a Mass Buffer, a Stunner, lots of buffers on the ground. Squirrel Ace is kind of an exception because it does have very high damage, but that defense break can be meaningful, especially if you have, say, a bunch of flying squirrels flying around. Your defense breaking, and then everyone's starting to one-shot things. It can be quite scary overall. So Friar Mantis is S tier because, again, he has the highest damage of any small in the game. He also gives a power buff. He's like Wyvern, but green, and he's pretty amazing for the most part. The Pristine Ornithopter is S tier because it has self-resurrect 50% of the time. Reviving is nice with a heal, but self-reviving is better because you can do a lot of scary things overall. Monarch Butterfly is like Statue without the debuffs, but it always provides all the buffs, so it's reliable in those regards. And then Hypnotoad is just incredible. It's just a great stunner. Like, the Wood Nymph is stronger, but Hypnotoad can do a lot of damage overall because he can stun, and he also scales off power, which is, again, meaningful, like I mentioned before. So dungeon selection. So I feel right now Dungeon 2, 4, and 5 are the strongest ones to use for your layout because they offer the most chance to use medium creatures, because mediums are stronger than smalls for the most part. So you want to obviously utilize the ones that allow you to use as many mediums as you possibly can. Now, you can categorize things as kind of more support and more offensive in nature. So you want to have a good, healthy mix. So this dungeon setup here, I have 3 supports of Wood Nymph, Statue, and Toad, and then 3 DPS characters who do offensive damage. And for the most part, you probably want to put a Toad in a lot of floor 1s because the AoE stun is so powerful if you don't have enough Wood Nymphs to go around. But at this point in time, we do have 3 Wood Nymphs, so you might have enough. You may not need to run Toad. But again, if everyone's using red cards, you want to use Toad to counter it. So Toad is quite pivotal to your dungeon defense for the most part. So I feel like this kind of dungeon composition is quite scary. You got a power buffer, 3 power users on the ground, and then debuffs and stunning. So it can be quite scary. Again, this could easily change in the future. This is kind of just hypothetically thinking. This can apply for Dungeon 2 and Dungeon 5 at the moment. So in conclusion, the PvP meta has been shifted once again with the kind of need to run multiple dungeons at the same time. I think that's quite exciting because I'm seeing a lot more dungeon diversity. It's not always the same cookie cutter Wood Nymph, Statue, Wyvern, Skeleton, Toad build. Like, there's actually some diversity, and I think that's quite exciting. And what would make it more exciting for me is possibly even just having 2 colors being buffed instead of 1 every week. So you could kind of have more interesting variety of people making the conscious decision to run, say, those particular colors to gain the stat bonuses, which can be very meaningful and powerful. So let me know what you think about this tier list in the comments below. What cards do you think you've been using a lot more often, and which ones have you found very scary or have used to great success since version 1.7 was released? Hopefully you all have a fantastic day. Wish you all the best of luck in your own CQ adventures, and happy questing.